Last thing Captain Garviel Loken touched before world ended wasn't bolter or blade. It was parchment emergency protocol sheet, third backup after Vox and data slate both failed. Paper edges bit into his gauntlet where ceramite weave had torn through. Material rated to withstand plasma shouldn't tear, but 3 months grinding through rubble rewrites specifications in blood. He'd read these shelter coordinates 47 times, memorizing numbers even though numbers meant nothing when buildings became abstract geology. His thumb left grease mark on corner where he'd gripped too hard. Bodies leave impressions on everything they touch, even when those bodies wear power armor and claim to transcend mere humanity. Even when they're already ghosts walking. The paper smelled wrong. Not smoke or promethium or the metallic tang permeating everything since virus bombing. It smelled like fear, which has no scent except to those who've known its taste. Loken folded the sheet into breastplate compartment, ceramic fingertips trembling barely perceptibly. That tremor meant his secondary nervous system recognized truths primary consciousness still denied. You had maybe 20 minutes. Your hands always knew first. Isstvan III existed 15 years under Imperial compliance before anyone whispered the word betrayal in context of Space Marines turning on Space Marines. The Coral City earned designation from acoustic engineering, not philosophy or faith. Massive resonance chambers built into every structure, every wall, every foundation stone amplified sound across 12 districts without degradation. Morning bells from Precentor's palace reached outer habitation blocks before citizens finished breakfast. Parents claimed you could hear children laughing from residential zones 15 kilometers distant on clear mornings when wind conditions aligned properly. Citizens demonstrated pride in this architectural achievement, with fervor usually reserved for military victories or religious observances. They'd witnessed Space Marines walk their streets as liberators, not conquerors, during initial compliance operations under Corvus Corax and Raven Guard 15 years prior. The Great Crusade's promise that humanity could unite under reason and imperial truth without endless war seemed validated by Isstvan's peaceful integration. 8 billion souls believed in that promise with conviction born from seeing it function daily. Governor Vardis Pral's corruption occurred gradually over 6 years before anyone on Terra registered concern. Not because Imperium demonstrated negligence, but because Isstvan's system occupied space so far from contested zones that dedicating intelligence resources seemed wasteful allocation. When astropathic distress signals finally penetrated bureaucratic layers to reach Council of Terra, they detailed rebellion already 6 years entrenched. The Emperor assigned matter to Warmaster Horus, with 4 complete legions as overwhelming response. Sons of Horus, Death Guard, Emperor's Children, World Eaters. Combined strength approached 200,000 Astartes, plus supporting army regiments and Mechanicum assets. Pral commanded perhaps 12,000 rebels, supplemented by psycho warriors called Warsingers, whose sonic attacks could liquefy organs inside intact armor. The mathematics should have rendered conflict mere formality. Arithmetic predicted swift conclusion, planetary governorship restored, Warsingers eliminated, order re-established. Instead, the numbers became theology written in ash and melted bone. What should have been suppression operation transformed into first overt act of Horus Heresy, moment when loyalist and traitor identities crystallized from ambiguous factional tensions into open warfare between Gene father and Gene's sons. Saul Tarvitz noticed discrepancies others dismissed or ignored. The Emperor's Children 10th Company captain possessed that dangerous quality of paying attention to details that didn't fit comfortable patterns. Unlike most of his legion who'd embraced escalating perfectionism sliding toward pathology, Tarvitz lacked relentless ambition poisoning Emperor's Children culture. He'd fought alongside Garviel Loken and Tarik Torgaddon on murder against megarachnids, on 6319 during compliance operations, on dozen campaigns where shared blood mattered more than Legion heraldry colors. Tarvitz understood fundamental truth about Lord Commander Eidolon. The man climbed over corpses to reach spotlights. Eidolon never delegated glory, ever. When Eidolon personally assigned Tarvitz to lead first assault wave against Vardus Pral's forces, something fractured in Tarvitz's understanding of reality. Eidolon should have been demanding that position for himself, elbowing aside any captain attempting to claim honor. Instead, he delegated first blood to line officer? Tarvitz couldn't articulate wrongness in words that would convince others, just felt it like temperature drop preceding storm, like pressure change before orbital bombardment, like silence before screaming starts. His instincts recognized pattern disruption even when conscious mind lacked framework to interpret warning signs. Nathaniel Garro experienced similar unease on different scale. The Death Guard's 7th Great Company battle captain had lost his leg at mid-thigh on Isstvan III, outer planet where preliminary actions against Pral's forces occurred. Warsinger's psychic scream sheared through ceramite and flesh alike. They rebuilt him with augmetics, but pain persisted in ghost nerves even when tissue was gone, phantom sensations of limb no longer present. Physical reconstruction proceeded successfully enough for him to resume duty. But something else felt reconstructed wrong about entire Isstvan campaign. Not enemy tactics, not strategic planning. Legion coordination. Meetings held excluding certain officers without explanation. Vox traffic encrypted beyond standard security protocols. Supply allocations that made no tactical sense. Little fractures in brotherhood he'd assumed bedrock permanent for 2 decades. After-action reports from Isstvan Extremis used clinical language hiding what Garro actually witnessed, sonic weaponry that liquefied organs inside intact armor, leaving Space Marines to drown in their own dissolved lung tissue while power armor remained superficially undamaged. The histories categorize this as foreshadowing, dramatic irony for readers who know betrayal approaches. But humans don't experience life as narrative with authorial structuring. They experience confusion without source, unease lacking identifiable cause, instincts screaming warnings conscious mind dismisses as paranoia or stress fatigue. Tarvitz stayed aboard ship instead of deploying planetside based on feeling he couldn't justify to superiors. Garro noticed supply discrepancies that made no immediate tactical sense. Loken wondered why Mournival meetings excluded him and Torgaddon without explanation provided. These weren't narrative clues for detective story. These were men feeling ground shift beneath them, without knowing earthquake had already started miles below surface. That difference matters profoundly. It separates academic historians from actual survivors, separates analysis from lived terror. Records from Isstvan Extremis' preliminary campaign exist in Mechanicum data vaults, though most remain classified above inquisitorial clearance. The reports describe tactical outcomes, enemy positions neutralized, objectives secured, casualties within acceptable parameters, without capturing what those acceptable parameters felt like to humans experiencing them. Garro's testimony decades later, recorded during Knights Errant debriefings, provides different accounting. Warsingers used psychic screams that propagated through armor, through ceramite, through force fields, directly into soft tissue. You heard the scream simultaneously outside and inside your skull. Your organs vibrated at frequencies flesh shouldn't withstand. Garro watched Space Marines collapse with armor intact, but internal structure liquefied. They'd fall, and armor would seal them into sarcophagus while they drowned in own dissolved organs. Some took minutes to die. Minutes. Official logs note Garro required medical evacuation after sustaining injuries. They don't mention he lost consciousness from pain so overwhelming his Astartes pain resistance training, engineered to allow functioning through injuries that would kill baseline humans instantly, completely failed to provide relief. They rebuilt his leg with augmetics that function mechanically perfect, but the ghost pain persists in nerves no longer present. He testified that pain taught him something about betrayal, how it continues hurting in spaces that should be empty. Little fractures appeared in Legion coordination, subtle enough to dismiss individually but forming pattern when aggregated. Certain officers excluded from tactical briefings without explanation. Vox channels encrypted beyond mission-critical necessity. Supply manifests showing equipment allocations that made no strategic sense. These details sound paranoid when voiced aloud. Easy to dismiss as stress response or misunderstanding protocol changes. But instinct recognized danger even when evidence remained circumstantial. What I find moving isn't their certainty, they had none, but their action despite uncertainty. Tarvitz didn't know virus bombing was planned when he maneuvered to stay aboard ship. He just felt wrongness, insufficient to convince others, but sufficient to trust his unease. That choice, acting on incomplete information because something felt broken, saved tens of thousands of lives even though he couldn't have known consequences at moment of decision. We remember heroic choices made with full knowledge of stakes. But most crucial decisions occur in fog of uncertainty, based on instinct and partial information, and trust in something feeling desperately wrong. I think that's harder than heroism with certainty. Anyone can charge enemy knowing death serves purpose, but to act on mere unease, risking career and reputation on hunch you can't justify? That takes different courage entirely. Tarvitz discovered virus bombs being loaded into Andronius's launch bays through combination of suspicion and chance positioning. Following instinct about why ship positioned outside standard formation, he'd made excuse to inspect armory sections. The ship's munitions bay held enough life-eater viral payload to sterilize continents, more than adequate to eliminate every living organism on Isstvan III's surface, including approximately 100,000 loyalist space marines currently engaged in urban warfare through Coral City streets against Praal's rebels. Discovery doesn't work like fiction presents it. No dramatic music swell, no sudden understanding of full implications. First thought, munitions allocation error. Second thought, contingency weapons if Praal deployed biowarfare first. Third thought, the one making his hands shake inside gauntlets despite Astartes' physiological controls, this was the actual mission. Not pacifying Praal. Killing brothers. The realization hit like Warsinger's scream, propagating through mental defenses directly into consciousness that wanted desperately to reject information as impossible. He stole Thunderhawk with engines still conducting pre-flight warm-up protocols, fled toward planet with interceptors hunting him like predator birds pursuing wounded prey. Tarvitz keyed emergency vox across every frequency simultaneously, voice cracking with fear not seen in Astartes' emotional ranges, screaming warnings through static while laser fire cooked his ship's hull plating. Most transmissions failed. Atmospheric interference, jamming, distance. But Nathaniel Garro heard, and Garro believed despite everything suggesting he shouldn't. That belief matters more than tactics or timing calculations. Garro commanded Death Guard frigate Eisenstein in orbital position near Thunderhawk's escape trajectory. Eidolon transmitted direct orders to Eisenstein, destroy Tarvitz's craft, claim it harbored renegade attempting to warn enemy forces. Standing orders from superior officer. Clear chain of command. Definitive instructions requiring immediate execution. Garro had known Tarvitz for years. They'd saved each other on pre-Axor campaign, bled together through battles where survival came down to trusting warrior beside you, without question or hesitation. When forced to choose between Warmaster's explicit orders and Honor Brothers' desperate warning delivered through combat damage and terror, Garro chose friendship. He destroyed Lead Interceptor instead of Thunderhawk, used Explosion Debris Cloud to claim target eliminated per orders. Bought Tarvitz maybe 90 seconds to reach atmosphere before deception became obvious. 90 seconds purchased with career and probably life. Surface Vox networks erupted with Tarvitz's transmission, like infection spreading through healthy tissue. Loken, coordinating assault elements through Siren Hold's twisted architecture and murderous Warsinger concentrations, heard his friend's voice crack with panic no Astartes should express in combat. Torgaddon, making jokes about Warsinger's poor tactical deployment moments earlier, went silent mid-sentence. World Eaters under Captain Erlin stopped mid-charge to process transmission content. Death Guard elements under various company commanders froze trying to reconcile warning with mission parameters. The transmission gave them minutes. Just minutes to locate airtight shelter before Sky fell carrying viral death. They scattered like animals sensing wildfire approaching, abandoning carefully prepared tactical positions, clawing through rubble toward bunkers and sealed structures. Many didn't make it, but 60,000 did, sealing themselves in catacombs and reinforced chambers moments before Life Eater virus swept across continents in wave of molecular dissolution. Life Eater virus propagates through any medium contacting organic tissue. Air, water, blood, sweat, saliva all become transmission vectors with infection efficiency approaching 100%. Incubation duration measured in seconds. Death followed within 60 seconds as cellular structure collapsed into accelerated putrefaction. Bodies didn't die so much as dissolve, liquefying inside armor that became sealed coffins preserving shape of warriors, while contents transformed to biological sludge. 12 billion civilians possessed no warning, no sealed chambers, no ceramite to buy precious extra seconds between infection and death. They inhaled morning air already carrying invisible death and felt lungs melt from inside. Vocal cords dissolved before screams could form. Nervous systems failed while consciousness remained briefly aware of dissolution. They didn't die with dignity or purpose. They rotted while still attempting to comprehend what was happening. Survivors who'd sealed themselves in bunkers before Virus Cloud arrived described the sound afterward. Not screaming, though plenty had screamed in final seconds before Virus destroyed vocal cords. The sound of 8 billion bodies simultaneously collapsing into biological sludge coating every surface. Wet, rhythmic, like rain on metal but sourced from decay rather than precipitation. It filled every street, every habitation block, every resonance chamber built to carry sound across kilometers without distortion. The Coral City's architectural genius became nightmare curse. Acoustic engineering designed to amplify bells and laughter now amplified death sounds until they reached orbital altitudes. Auspex operators aboard Warmaster's flagship reported psychic death scream exceeding astronomican volume and intensity. 12 billion souls crying out simultaneously as flesh liquefied, generating psychic shockwave that tore reality's fabric. The boundary between materium and warp frayed, allowing corruption to seep through gaps created by mass death. Firestorm ignition followed viral bombing by calculated interval. Decomposing organic matter produces combustible gases. Viral decay on planetary scale generates atmospheric conditions approaching pure fuel. Horus initiated incendiary bombardment that ignited entire atmosphere in conflagration, exceeding temperatures inside Starship plasma reactors. Cities didn't burn so much as melt. Metal girders flowed like wax. Rockcrete glowed cherry red before shattering from thermal shock. Stone vaporized. The storm raged for days as atmospheric oxygen burned off in massive convection currents, scouring land down to bedrock. In sealed bunkers, survivors heard nothing, felt nothing except heat through meter-thick walls, watched temperature gauges climb toward power armor tolerance thresholds. New brothers were dying screaming in fires hot enough to vaporize ceramite if exposure continued long enough. They sat in darkness, listening to own breathing through helmet respirators, while world burned above them, and viral corpse sludge of 12 billion people cooked into char coating everything. The psychic death scream reportedly exceeded Astronomicon by significant margin for approximately 14 seconds. Navigators across sector reported momentary blindness as psychic shockwave propagated through warp. Some went permanently mad from experiencing billion-fold death simultaneously. The event tore reality in ways Imperial authorities couldn't fully suppress or hide. Astropaths died spontaneously across nearby systems. Even blanks, those rare individuals possessing no warp presence, reported feeling something vast and terrible happen in Immaterium. Tarik Torgaddon made jokes even sealed in chamber with failing air recyclers straining to filter ash particles seeping through ventilation systems. Even knowing Gene Father had attempted murdering them all, even facing certain death when air ran out, Torgaddon tried lightening mood through humor. At least we're popular enough to earn dedicated extermination attempt. Shows Horus cares about details. Nobody laughed. But Torgaddon kept trying, because that's what he'd always done. Used humor like mortar-binding bricks, holding people together when circumstances pulled them apart through stress and terror and despair. Loken testified later that Tarik's hands shook when making those jokes. Tremor visible through power armor's gloves, betraying physiological stress response Astartes conditioning should have suppressed. Not shaking from fear exactly. Shaking from rage compressed into forced levity, because showing rage would demoralize warriors who needed every psychological advantage to survive coming months. Torgaddon transformed anger into attempted comedy, because that served brothers better than honest expression of fury at betrayal. When Horus Aximand killed Torgaddon 3 months later during final loyalist purge, witnesses reported Tarik went quiet. Little Horus, called that for resemblance to Warmaster despite no actual relation, had served beside Torgaddon in Mournival for decades. They'd been brothers in informal council advising Horus on Legion matters, trusted companions who'd fought shoulder to shoulder across galaxy. Now Aximand came planet-side specifically to eliminate remaining loyalists. Personal mission. Deliberate choice. The duel lasted minutes. Torgaddon wounded Aximand twice, opened gash across chest that would have killed baseline human instantly. But Aximand wore Terminator plate, providing protection and enhanced strength that overwhelmed Torgaddon's degraded equipment. After 3 months continuous combat with no resupply, no maintenance, no replacement parts for damaged systems, even Astartes' armor fails. When Aximand's power sword severed Torgaddon's head from shoulders, he reportedly stood silent over body until Loken arrived, screaming grief that transcended training and discipline into raw animal anguish at losing brother. Aximand experienced that kill as trauma he never fully processed. Later testimonies from Siege of Terror indicate he dreamed about Torgaddon regularly, unusual for Astartes whose neurological conditioning typically suppresses dream activity. He'd see Tarik in moments before sleep, hear his voice making jokes about betrayal's absurdity. Wake convinced his friend still lived somewhere. The guilt followed Aximand through entire heresy, haunted him during campaigns where he fought as traitor, while some fragment of conscience recognized fundamental wrongness of murdering Gene brothers. Ancient Rylanor waited 10,000 years to die properly. The Emperor's Children Contemptor Dreadnought fought through virus bombing by sheer determination and luck of positioning inside sealed hangar when viral death swept world. He endured 3-month siege, survived orbital bombardment that killed most remaining loyalists through combination of dreadnought durability and collapsing structure providing inadvertent shelter. His sarcophagus sustained damage that should have killed lesser machines or occupants. War spirit endured through mechanical failure and isolation and slow realization that escape was impossible. When final bombardments ceased and traitors declared victory, Rylanor found himself alone in collapsed hangar beneath what remained of Precentor's palace. Trapped. Damaged. Helpless to pursue revenge directly. So he waited. For 10 millennia. Alone in darkness occasionally broken by warp, spawned horrors resulting from psychic death scream that tore reality. He spent those centuries preparing one moment of vengeance against Gene Father, who'd betrayed him. The virus bomb he'd discovered unexploded in hangar debris became centerpiece of elaborate trap. He spent decades, centuries, jury-rigging sonic weaponry from fallen Emperor's children traitors who'd attempted killing him in months after main battle concluded. Built psychic beacon from components salvaged through decade-long scavenger hunts through collapsed ruins. Wired entire assembly into his own damaged chassis so detonation would require only thought command when moment arrived. When Fulgrim finally returned to Isstvan III millennia later, drawn by psychic beacon across galaxy, Rylanor had achieved patience approaching Zen meditation. Fulgrim arrived as Daemon Prince of Slanesh, serpentine monstrosity bearing only superficial resemblance to Primarch Rylanor remembered. The transformation horrified Rylanor more than death or isolation had. This thing wasn't his Gene Father. This was corruption wearing Fulgrim's face as cruel mockery. Fulgrim offered corruption as gift, promised new flesh body free from sarcophagus imprisonment, offered pleasure and sensation beyond mortal comprehension, attempted seduction through promises of perfection and transcendence and release from pain and solitude. Rylanor's response entered imperial legend. I am Rylanor, ancient of rites, venerable of the Palatine host, and proud servant of Emperor of mankind, beloved by all. I reject you now and always. Then, detonated bomb. The explosion couldn't kill Daemon Primarch, but achieved something more important. Fulgrim fled, not from physical danger, but from something more fundamental: shame. For 10,000 years, no one had rejected his magnificence with such absolute finality. Rylanor chose annihilation over corruption, chose death with integrity over life without it. That choice wounded Fulgrim more than any blade could. The Daemon Prince retreated from Dead World carrying psychic scar that persisted through millennia afterward. Rylanor won through rejection rather than violence. Lucius the Eternal began falling on Isstvan III by betraying Tarvitz. The swordsman had fought alongside Saul as brothers for years, but ambition poisoned whatever loyalty remained after Emperor's children started embracing perfectionism approaching pathology. When traitor forces offered rank advancement in exchange for intelligence on loyalist defensive positions, Lucius provided detailed maps showing fortification locations, supply cache coordinates, command center positions. The betrayal cost thousands of lives as orbital strikes targeted precisely where loyalists concentrated. Tarvitz discovered Lucius's treachery through simple observation. Defensive positions he'd shared only with trusted captains became bombardment coordinates within hours. Pattern recognition revealed traitor in their midst. When Tarvitz confronted Lucius in personal combat, duel became meditation on what they'd lost. Not just friendship, but certainty that shared suffering created unbreakable bonds. Tarvitz won that duel, one of few warriors ever defeating Lucius in single combat. But victory tasted hollow because it proved betrayal ran deeper than Primarch's choices. Brother could turn on brother for nothing more than promised advancement. Personal ambition could override brotherhood forged through decades of shared combat. Tarvitz didn't kill Lucius when he possessed chance, allowed him to retreat. Historians debate whether mercy or simple exhaustion stayed his hand. Either way, the moment captured Isstvan III's essential tragedy. Victory felt like defeat, because winning meant killing brothers you'd loved. 90,000 loyalist Astartes deployed to Isstvan III's surface in first wave. Maybe 60,000 survived virus bombing thanks to Tarvitz's warning, providing crucial minutes to reach shelter. After 3 months grinding urban warfare through ruined Coral City, perhaps 12,000 still fought when final orbital bombardment began. Arithmetic puts casualty rate around 87%. Numbers become abstract above certain scale. But each death represented history erased. They'd been recruited from different worlds, different cultures, different epochs spanning Great Crusade's 2-century expansion. Some were Terran-born, original Legion stock who remembered Emperor walking among them during Unification Wars. Others came from recently compliant worlds, proof that Imperium could transform conquered populations into transhuman warriors within single generation. They'd fought together for decades, some for full century, knew each other's combat habits intimately, could predict movements like dancers, knowing choreography without rehearsal need. They'd shared victories on 1,000 worlds, bearing names no one remembers now. Mourned fallen brothers with ceremonies that varied by Legion culture but shared fundamental grief at losing irreplaceable warriors. Built brotherhood from shared blood and shared purpose and shared belief that Great Crusade represented humanity's best hope for survival among hostile stars. That brotherhood wasn't abstract concept or propaganda slogan. It was lived experience of trust, earned through desperate battles, where survival required absolute faith in warrior beside you. Virus bombing didn't just kill them, it erased them. No burial rites, no remembrance ceremonies, no recording names for posterity archives. They melted into anonymous biological sludge coating Coral City's streets. When firestorm came, that organic matter dissolved into ash, swept into atmosphere during convection storms. Few who survived bombardment fought knowing they'd already been declared dead by both sides. No one would remember their names. No official histories would honor their sacrifice. They died twice, once when Horus fired virus bombs, again when records listed them among traitors who'd turned against Emperor. Garviel Loken survived buried in rubble for years before Garro located him during knights-errant recruitment mission years later. Experience broke something fundamental in his psyche that Astartes' mental conditioning couldn't repair. He forgot his own name, called himself Cerberus like guardian dog at underworld gates separating living from dead. Appropriate metaphor given he wandered ruins killing zombies Nurgle's power had animated from virus-dead corpses, as corruption seeped through reality's torn fabric. Planet's psychic death scream had fractured boundary between materium and immaterium. Demonic entities manifested spontaneously in collapsed structures. Reality bent around warp incursions that physics couldn't explain or contain. Loken fought alone through nightmare landscape where natural laws occasionally failed, where dead walked wearing skin of friends he'd known, where geometry defied sanity and time passed inconsistently depending on proximity to warp breaches. When Garro finally located him, Loken attacked immediately believing all space marines were traitors now. Couldn't distinguish between former brothers in Legion colors he'd trusted and Gene brothers who'd murdered him. Required extended verbal persuasion and physical subduing before Garro could convince him to stand down. Even then, Loken's psyche remained fractured, requiring months of careful psychological reconstruction before he could function as warrior again, rather than feral survivor driven by trauma and rage. Isstvan III became Dead World, quarantined by Imperial Navy for 10,000 years following Heresy's conclusion. No one visited except occasional inquisitorial investigation teams studying warp corruption manifestations. No pilgrims came to honor fallen loyalists. Planet served only as tombstone, silent reminder of where heresy truly began. Horus's betrayal at Isstvan IV months later proved more strategically devastating. Dropsite massacre shattered 3 entire legions in single afternoon, removing Salamanders, Raven Guard, Iron Hands from active campaign status for Heresy's duration. But Isstvan III held different significance. First moment when Astartes killed Astartes not through accident or misunderstanding, but as calculated policy. Brother against brother, Gene father ordering Gene son's murders. The wound from that initial betrayal never fully healed across 10 millennia since. Every chapter descended from legions torn by Isstvan III carries trauma in institutional memory. Every successor formation remembers when trust broke irreparably. Eisenstein carried warning to terror despite overwhelming obstacles. Garro commanded 70 loyalist Death Guard who'd seized control of frigate from traitors attempting to prevent escape. They fled Isstvan system pursued by traitor fleet vastly superior in firepower and speed. Made desperate voyage through warp storms that should have destroyed lighter vessel lacking proper navigator after theirs died from psychic backlash during emergency immaterium transition. Ship barely held together. Warp corruption seeped through failing Geller fields, manifesting daemons in corridors where crew fought desperate battles against entities that shouldn't exist according to imperial truth, denying chaos's existence. Ignatius Grulgor, possessed by plague daemon, nearly killed entire crew before being destroyed through combination of blessed weapons and raw courage. When Eisenstein finally limped into Sol System's orbital defenses weeks later, hulls scarred by daemon claws and warp energy, Rogel Dorn initially refused believing testimony. Couldn't believe Horus would betray Emperor. Evidence became undeniable only when Garro showed him proof impossible to dismiss. Bodies of plague, corrupted Death Guard exhibiting mutation and warp taint, corruption manifesting in cargo holds despite ship being in real space, desperate testimony from survivors who'd witnessed virus bombing with own eyes and could describe specific details no fabrication could invent. Those 70 Death Guard became foundation of what eventually evolved into Grey Knight's chapter and Inquisition as institutions. Their names: Nathaniel Garro, Iacton Cruz, Solon Decius, others whose identities were scrubbed from official records when they accepted new roles serving Malcador's hidden agendas. They'd survived Isstvan III, not through superior skill or divine intervention, but through chance positioning and desperate choices made in crisis moments. That randomness haunted them permanently. Why did they live when 90,000 brothers died? Survivors' guilt among Astartes typically manifests as intensified dedication to mission, rather than psychological paralysis affecting baseline humans. But guilt persisted regardless. Garro testified extensively about Isstvan III for Emperor's personal archives. His accounts form primary historical sources for what actually occurred planetside. Between official statements, he'd speak quietly about hearing screams at night. Not metaphor. Actual psychic echoes of death scream that exceeded Astronomican's volume, embedded in local warp topology like scar tissue in immaterium itself. We remember Sanguinius at Eternity Gate dying to wound Horus, knowing Emperor would need that weakness to achieve final victory. We remember Rogel Dorn holding walls during Siege of Terra, buying time measured in hours that allowed loyalist reinforcements to arrive before defenses completely collapsed. We remember victories earned through sacrifice possessing clear strategic purpose, where death advanced causes worth dying for. Isstvan III offers no such narrative comfort. Loyalists there died achieving nothing strategically significant except delaying Horus's timeline by 3 months while eliminating resistance from his own legions. Their sacrifice didn't change war's eventual outcome, didn't inspire widespread loyalist resistance movements, didn't demonstrate virtue triumphing over corruption through moral superiority. It just demonstrated that betrayal succeeds when striking without warning against unprepared targets. Clean military analysis concludes Isstvan III represented tactical necessity for Horus, eliminating elements within own forces whose loyalty to Emperor might compromise future operations. Brutal calculation, but logical given strategic objectives. But perhaps that analysis misses deeper truth worth considering. Loyalists of Isstvan III faced impossible choice and chose correctly despite knowing it meant death. When Tarvitz discovered virus bombing plot, he could have remained silent, ensured personal survival by staying aboard ship and claiming ignorance later. When Garro heard Tarvitz's warning, he could have followed explicit orders from superior officer and destroyed Thunderhawk as commanded. When Loken realized Horus had betrayed them, he could have surrendered, negotiated survival by abandoning Emperor and accepting new order under Warmaster's leadership. At every decision point they chose loyalty, knowing it meant death without strategic value. Not because death would change war's outcome or inspire others or achieve tangible military objective. They chose loyalty because loyalty mattered independent of consequences or practical considerations. That's fundamentally different lesson than heroic last stands typically teach. Sanguinius died heroically, but died knowing his death served essential purpose in Emperor's eventual victory. Dead of Isstvan III knew their deaths were waste from any strategic perspective, knew they'd been murdered for refusing to join rebellion that would probably succeed, knew history would forget their names and erase their sacrifice from official records. They fought anyway, died anyway. Chose annihilation over apostasy even when apostasy offered survival and power, while annihilation offered nothing except unmarked graves on dead world no one would visit. Records won't remember most of their names. Administratum archives lost detailed casualty lists during bureaucratic consolidations following heresy. But their choice, dying faithful rather than living corrupted, echoes louder than any victory hymn or triumphant campaign history. What makes Isstvan III different isn't tactical considerations or strategic implications. It's choosing principle, when principle costs everything and provides nothing tangible in return. That's harder than dying heroically knowing death serves purpose. Anyone with courage can charge enemy when understanding death advances important cause. But choosing extinction over collaboration when collaboration promises survival and power? Choosing to die pointlessly by every military metric except one that matters most, maintaining integrity? That requires different moral calculation entirely. Imperium builds monuments to victors, raises statues commemorating successful campaigns, glorious battles won through courage and tactical brilliance. Maybe we should build monuments to defeated who refused surrender despite defeat being inevitable. To dead who died, achieving nothing except dying as themselves, rather than as corrupted things wearing their faces and names. Would that monument inspire anyone? Would anyone visit Dead World to honor soldiers who lost every tactical engagement, yet won something more important? I don't know. But truth matters when everything else has burned to ash. Isstvan III doesn't inspire the way other battles do, doesn't provide comfortable narrative about good triumphing through virtue or courage overcoming impossible odds. It just hurts. That's honest. Sometimes grief serves no purpose except acknowledging precious things were destroyed forever without possibility of recovery or redemption. 90,000 warriors who'd spent decades building brotherhood watched that brotherhood murder them. Watched gene fathers they'd served faithfully order their extermination as strategic necessity. They fought back not because they could win, but because accepting murder without resistance meant admitting murderers were right. Their deaths weren't glorious or meaningful by conventional metrics. They were only necessary in sense that maintaining identity sometimes requires dying, rather than compromising fundamental principles for survival. That's truth, even when truth provides no comfort. Sometimes honesty hurts worse than comforting lies. But when everything else has been burned away by betrayal and virus fire and 10,000 years of institutional amnesia, truth remains. Cold and hard, and offering no consolation. These are the names we still remember. Garviel Loken, who reclaimed identity as Lunar Wolf while dying crushed under rubble. Tarik Torgaddon, who made jokes until friend's power sword took his head. Saul Tarvitz, who flew through interceptor fire to warn brothers marked for death. Nathaniel Garro, who chose honor brothers' warning over Warmaster's orders. Ancient Rylanor, who waited 10 millennia for one moment of defiance. Thousands more, whose names were lost, but whose choice to die loyal echoes through centuries. We remember not because they won. They lost comprehensively by every military measure. We remember because they chose correctly when choosing correctly meant choosing death. That matters. Perhaps more than victories celebrated in official histories and commemorated through monuments and holidays. Perhaps choosing principle over survival when survival tempts with power and immortality matters most of all. Temperature told stories bodies understood before minds accepted. Inside sealed bunker 3 days after virus bombing, Captain Erlin of World Eaters noticed condensation forming on interior walls despite environmental controls set to prevent such accumulation. Water droplets contained trace amounts of dissolved organic matter, microscopic particles of 12 billion dead filtering through ventilation systems, designed to process atmospheric contaminants, but never engineered for planetary-scale putrefaction. The droplets smelled sweet and rotten simultaneously. Warriors used to battlefield carnage found themselves retching from smell of liquefied civilization seeping through. Supposedly sealed barriers. Air pressure fluctuated wildly as firestorm consumed oxygen across hemispheres. Barometric sensors showed readings dropping toward vacuum levels in some regions while spiking to crushing pressures elsewhere as superheated gases expanded. Astarte's armor could compensate, but the pressure changes created disorientation, inner ear problems, balance issues, spatial reasoning failures. Warriors who'd fought flawlessly for decades found themselves stumbling, misjudging distances, unable to trust their senses about which direction was up. Light filtering through ash clouds turned everything gray and orange simultaneously, colors that shouldn't coexist producing visual dissonance that strained optic nerves. Shadows fell in wrong directions as multiple light sources from ongoing fires created competing illumination angles. Depth perception failed. Warriors trained to judge range perfectly in any lighting condition found themselves unable to determine if targets stood 10 meters or 50 meters distant. Simple tasks like climbing rubble piles became exercises in frustrated concentration as visual information contradicted proprioceptive feedback. Sound behaved strangely in ruins of Coral City, where acoustic engineering designed to amplify bells now amplified explosions, screams, the wet impact of bodies hitting ground from lethal heights. Warriors reported hearing their own voices from 50 meters away, words bouncing through resonance chambers and returning seconds later. Conversations became nightmarish echo chambers where you heard yourself speaking phrases you'd finished minutes earlier. Some sealed their helmet vox grills just to escape auditory recursion, driving them toward madness. Dust composition changed daily as fires consumed different materials. Initially just pulverized rockcrete and vaporized metal. Then organic matter burnt to carbon particulates fine enough to pass through most filter systems. Then exotic compounds as promethium stores and chemical weapons cooked off, releasing carcinogenic vapors that would have killed baseline humans in minutes. Astarte's physiology handled toxins adequately, but constant exposure degraded performance incrementally. After 3 weeks, warriors moved slower, thought more deliberately, required rest periods Astartes' conditioning should have rendered unnecessary. Debris fields created labyrinths where straight-line distance meant nothing. Navigation required constant recalculation as routes that existed yesterday collapsed into impassable tangles overnight. Warriors memorized paths through specific ruins, only to find those landmarks obliterated by bombardment or spontaneous structural collapse. Squads became separated by meters of rubble that might as well have been kilometers given time required to dig through or find alternative passage. What should have been 30-minute marches between positions stretched into day-long expeditions through unstable terrain where every step risked triggering avalanche of broken architecture. The dead presented unique problems. Viral bombing had liquefied bodies, but armor remained. Thousands of intact suits of power armor scattered across city, some still sealed around biological sludge their former occupants had become. Others cracked open, showing contents. Warriors passed brothers' armor daily, sometimes recognized specific heraldry or battle damage patterns identifying which companies those brothers had served in. Nobody discussed it, just stepped over dead friends and kept moving, because stopping meant thinking about what remained inside those ceramite shells. Temperature extremes became weapon as much as enemy fire. Daytime heat from ongoing fires pushed power armor cooling systems toward failure limits. Night brought cold as thermal mass radiated heat into atmosphere stripped of insulating gases. Warriors alternated between heat exhaustion and hypothermia within 12-hour cycles, bodies struggling to compensate for environmental swings that baseline humans couldn't have survived even with full environmental gear. Astartes' physiology managed. Barely. But constant strain degraded everything incrementally until even superhuman stamina reached limits. Thirst became constant companion. Water supplies contaminated by viral residue and ash particulates required extensive filtration before consumption. Recycling systems in armor could process some but not enough for sustained operations. Warriors began rationing water to dangerous levels, accepting dehydration as necessary sacrifice to extend operational duration between resupply opportunities that never came. Some drank contaminated water, accepting risk of infection rather than dying from thirst. Apothecaries treated increasing numbers of viral contamination cases despite virus supposedly burning out days earlier. Solomon Demeter commanded Emperor's Children's Second Company until virus bombing. Survived initial strike by virtue of being inside sealed armory conducting weapon maintenance when Tarvitz's warning arrived. Reached bunker with 37 warriors from his company. 3 months later, only 4 still lived. He'd watched 33 brothers die to orbital strikes, ambushes, equipment failures, and simple bad luck of being in wrong place when Titan walked through their position. Each death diminished him measurably. First casualties he processed with tactical detachment drilled by decades of warfare, noted their positions for retrieval later, logged their service records for memorial ceremonies that would never occur, moved on to next engagement. By 20th loss, emotional armor started failing. He'd known these warriors for years, remembered their jokes, their habits, the way veteran Sergeant Valkyr always checked Bolter 3 times before engagement, or Brother Sergeant Braineur's tendency to hum marching songs during ammunition reload. When Brother Tafel died, last battle brother aside from 3 others still fighting, Demeter broke down completely. Just sat on rubble pile and wept, power armor frame shaking with sobs that shouldn't have been possible for emotional conditioned Astartes. His remaining warriors stood helpless, watching their captain cry for 10 minutes straight before he recovered composure, stood, apologized quietly, and ordered them back to fighting positions. They never mentioned it afterward. But they'd seen their captain broken by grief that accumulated until weight exceeded any strength could bear. Sergeant Huron Fall of Death Guard's 7th Great Company saved 12 warriors through simple stubbornness combined with mechanical expertise. His unit found themselves trapped in collapsed transit tunnel with limited air supply and no obvious escape route. While others began calculating how long oxygen would last, Huron Fall disassembled his own armor's life support system, jury-rigged it to filter carbon dioxide more efficiently, connected it to makeshift atmospheric processor built from scavenged parts and improvised components. System shouldn't have worked. His technical knowledge was adequate but not exceptional. Available components were damaged and incompatible. Power supply came from cracked plasma cell leaking radiation at unsafe levels. Entire assembly looked like something built by desperate scavenger rather than Space Marine technician. But it worked. Kept 13 men alive for 6 days until rescue squad tunneled through from surface. When they extracted him, his right arm showed radiation burns from plasma cell proximity. He'd known exposure risk, but positioned himself closest to dangerous components to spare others. Accepted probable permanent damage to preserve warriors he commanded. Huron Fall never mentioned the burns afterward, just wrapped damaged arm in bandages when Apothecary wasn't watching, and continued fighting. Arm functioned at maybe 60% capacity, but he adapted techniques, used left arm more, compensated through tactical positioning that minimized need for dual-handed weapon operation. Other warriors noticed, but followed his example by not commenting. 3 weeks later, he died to sniper round that wouldn't have penetrated his helmet if he'd maintained proper head position. But radiation damage had created blind spot in his vision he hadn't acknowledged. Brother Apothecary Cedrus, of Emperor's Children, treated more than injured bodies. Spent hours with warriors, experiencing psychological breakdown from witnessing friends killed. From understanding they'd been marked for death by own gene father. From simple, overwhelming stress of fighting without hope of survival or rescue. Astarte's mental conditioning should have prevented such failures. But conditioning assumes normal battlefield stresses, not betrayal on existential scale combined with 3 months continuous combat and certain death. He developed improvised talk-down techniques for warriors experiencing combat paralysis, rage spirals, suicidal ideation, dissociative episodes where they forgot who they were or what they fought for. Talked them through flashbacks to virus bombing, to watching friends die, to moments when reality fragmented under stress load, exceeding any threshold designers imagined power armor occupants might encounter. His success rate approached 80%, high considering circumstances but meaning 20% of cases ended with warrior becoming combat ineffective permanently. Cedrus carried that 20% as personal failure. Logged each case, reviewed decisions wondering what alternative approach might have saved warriors his methods couldn't reach. After 3 months treating hundreds of psychological casualties, in addition to normal medical responsibilities, he reported his own stress levels approaching breakdown thresholds. Requested temporary relief to process trauma before continuing duties. Request was denied. No replacement apothecaries available. He accepted denial, returned to work, functioned adequately for another 2 weeks before suffering complete psychological collapse during surgery, attempting to save warrior with abdominal trauma. Found himself unable to remember surgical procedures he'd performed thousands of times. Stood over patient with hands shaking too violently to control instruments properly, mind blank of medical knowledge that should have been automatic. Brother Sergeant had to physically remove him from operating theater, while another warrior with field medicine training completed procedure. Cedrus spent next 6 hours catatonic, staring at nothing, unresponsive to communication attempts. Eventually recovered enough to resume duties, but never regained previous competence. Died 2 weeks later to ambush he should have detected, but didn't, because psychological trauma had degraded combat awareness below functional levels. World Eater Centurion Shabran Dar led 80 warriors in defense of northern sector approaches. maintained organized resistance despite his legion's reputation for berserker rage, because he understood tactically sound defense required discipline under fire. When Angron himself led World Eater's assault against loyalist positions, Dar faced impossible choice: stand and be slaughtered by own Primarch and Gene brothers, or retreat and abandon positions critical to overall defensive strategy. He chose third option. Ordered his warriors to scatter and conduct guerrilla operations, rather than face-to-face confrontation with vastly superior force. World Eater's doctrine condemned such tactics as cowardly, but Dar prioritized keeping his men alive and combat effective over following doctrinal purity. His 80 scattered into small teams conducting hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, sniper operations against traitor positions. Inflicted disproportionate casualties while sustaining minimal losses through superior tactical positioning and refusal to engage unfavorable matchups. Angron reportedly flew into rage when he learned loyalist World Eaters were using cowardly tactics against his assault forces. Ordered their elimination as highest priority, assigned full company of traitor World Eaters to hunt down and destroy Dar's dispersed teams. 3-week campaign followed with traitors expending enormous resources, eliminating guerrillas who refused conventional battle. When they finally cornered Dar personally, he'd lost 73 of his 80 original warriors, but killed estimated 400 traitors through asymmetric warfare tactics. His final words before being torn apart by Chainsword: "We died on our terms." The incendiary bombardment didn't begin immediately after viral deployment. Horus waited calculated interval, allowing virus to propagate fully, ensuring maximum organic matter dissolution before ignition. Scientific precision applied to mass murder. When bombardment began, initial strikes targeted atmospheric composition verification points, analyzing gas mixtures to confirm optimal combustibility before main barrage commenced. First wave used standard high-explosive shells, creating scattered fires across Coral City. Survivors watching from sealed bunkers saw familiar orange flames, normal combustion, consuming structural materials. Then second wave arrived carrying incendiaries specifically formulated to ignite atmospheric gases produced by decomposing organic matter. Flames changed color, shifted from orange to blue-white. Temperatures jumped from hundreds to thousands of degrees within seconds. Air itself began burning. Convection patterns created windstorms exceeding hurricane force. Superheated gases rose, creating vacuum at ground level that drew in air from surrounding regions. Wind speeds hit 300 kilometers per hour, enough to strip remaining structures down to foundations, to lift debris the size of armored vehicles and slam them through buildings. Survivors felt wind through meter-thick bunker walls, felt structures shift as atmospheric pressure differentials stressed foundations designed for seismic activity, but never wind loading of this magnitude. Temperature inside sealed bunkers climbed toward lethal levels even for Astartes in full armor. External sensors showed surface temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, to vaporize water instantly, to ignite materials normally considered fireproof. Power armor cooling systems struggled maintaining internal temperatures compatible with human survival. Warriors began experiencing heat stress despite superhuman physiology and protective equipment. Some stripped armor, accepting vulnerability to atmospheric contamination, in preference to slow cooking inside ceramic shells, becoming ovens. Oxygen deprivation occurred as fires consumed atmospheric gases faster than circulation patterns could replenish. Bunker air supplies became precious resources measured in hours rather than days. Some warriors voluntarily entered sus and membrane-suspended animation to reduce oxygen consumption, trusting brothers to wake them when firestorm passed. Others simply sat still, minimized movement, breathed slowly trying to extend air supply through conscious metabolic control that Astartes training enabled but couldn't sustain indefinitely. The sound exceeded anything survivors described as comparable to previous combat experience. Not simple explosion noise, but continuous roar like being inside jet engine running at full thrust for hours. Acoustic pressure damaged hearing even through helmet audio protection systems designed to prevent sonic weapon injury. Warriors emerged from bunkers after firestorm with permanent hearing damage. Tinnitus that would persist for rest of their lives. Audio processing difficulties making verbal communication challenging. Light from fires penetrated bunker walls in places, cooking through insulation and creating incandescent spots on interior surfaces where thermal energy exceeded material tolerance thresholds. Warriors watched walls begin glowing dull red, shifted position away from hot spots, recalculated how much thermal load structure could withstand before failure. Some bunkers failed. Walls melted through. Warriors inside cooked alive in their armor, unable to escape, unable to do anything except die screaming as temperatures exceeded even Astartes' heat resistance. Firestorm burned for 96 hours. 4 days of continuous conflagration, consuming every combustible material across multiple continents. When it finally exhausted fuel supply and atmospheric oxygen levels, silence that followed felt more disturbing than noise had. Warriors emerged from bunkers to landscape, transformed beyond recognition. Buildings vaporized. Streets melted into glossy surfaces where heat had liquefied rock. Bodies gone entirely, burned to ash, then scattered by windstorms. The sky looked wrong. Ash particles suspended in upper atmosphere created twilight at noon, scattered light in ways producing colors human eyes weren't designed to process. Red, gray, orange simultaneously. Everything covered in fine black powder that got into armor seals. Contaminated water supplies, coated lungs despite filtration systems. Warriors coughed up black phlegm for weeks. Felt grit between teeth no matter how carefully they filtered drinking water, watched black residue accumulate in every crevice of equipment. The smell changed. Not biological rot anymore. Firestorm had consumed that. Now smelled like burned metal, scorched rock, exotic chemical compounds vaporizing from destroyed industrial facilities. Promethium combustion products. Plasma weapon residue. Exotic materials used in architectural construction, breaking down under thermal stress into carcinogenic vapors. The atmosphere became toxic soup, requiring continuous filtration to avoid poisoning even Astartes' physiologies engineered to tolerate extreme environmental contamination. Navigational landmarks ceased to exist. Warriors who'd memorized terrain features for tactical positioning found every reference point destroyed. Used compass bearings, but magnetic anomalies from fires and plasma weapons made readings unreliable. Resorted to dead reckoning and trial-and-error navigation through moonscape, bearing no resemblance to city that had existed days earlier. Units became lost within kilometers of known positions. Wandered for days trying to relocate friendly forces in environment hostile to all life. 3 months changes people. Changes what they prioritize, what they consider acceptable, what lines they'll cross for survival. Loyalists arrived Isstvan III as space marines, elite warriors confident in abilities, certain of purpose, comfortable with brotherhood providing support and replacing family. They emerged as something different. Survivors with 1,000-meter stares and hands that never stopped shaking and nightmares about friends who'd tried killing them. Medical supplies ran out after first month. Apothecaries improvised with materials never designed for medical use. Sterilized wounds with promethium since antiseptics were exhausted. Used salvaged materials for wound dressings, accepted infection risk as inevitable rather than preventable. performed surgery without anesthetic because painkillers depleted completely after treating thousands of casualties with finite initial supply. Warriors endured surgery fully conscious, biting on straps to avoid screaming, while apothecaries cut into them with salvaged tools barely adequate for purpose. Food became issue as emergency rations depleted. Space Marines can survive on organic matter baseline humans would consider inedible. Astartes' digestive systems can extract nutrition from nearly anything biological. But even those systems require fuel. Warriors began consuming materials that would have disgusted them weeks earlier. Lubricating oils with trace organic content. Insulation materials made from plant fibers. Enemy dead when necessity overcame revulsion. One recorded instance of Emperor's Children unit forced to consume own fallen brothers to avoid starvation, accepting that cannibalism of fellow loyalists was necessary to continue fighting. Ammunition scarcity forced tactical changes. Warriors who'd fought entire careers with doctrine of overwhelming firepower learned to value every bolt, every plasma cell, every grenade as precious resource impossible to replace. Marksmanship standards increased dramatically from necessity, couldn't afford missed shots. Close combat became preferred engagement method despite risk, since blades didn't deplete like ammunition. Ancient Rylanor documented watching warriors disassemble broken bolters to scavenge components for functional weapons, creating Frankenstein weapons cobbled from 3 damaged pieces to make 1 working firearm. Armor maintenance became constant struggle. Power armor requires sophisticated support infrastructure for proper maintenance. That infrastructure didn't exist after virus bombing destroyed maintenance facilities. Warriors conducted field repairs with improvised tools, jury-rigged damaged systems, accepted degraded performance as inevitable. Armor that should have provided full environmental protection developed seal failures, allowing ash infiltration. Servo-assisted strength enhancement degraded as power cells depleted, and recharging became impossible. After 3 months, most warriors fought in armor functioning at 20% design capacity. Psychological degradation occurred despite Astartes' mental conditioning. The conditioning assumes normal stresses, combat, loss of brothers, difficult tactical situations. Doesn't account for betrayal by Gene Father, 3 months continuous combat without rest, certain death combined with isolation from support networks. Warriors began displaying symptoms that shouldn't affect Space Marines: severe anxiety, panic attacks, dissociative episodes, depression, suicidal ideation, rage spirals ending in friendly fire incidents. Captain Tarvitz documented at least 37 cases where warriors had to be forcibly restrained to prevent suicide attempts or attacks on fellow loyalists triggered by combat stress exceeding tolerance thresholds. No facilities for treating such cases. No trained personnel except apothecaries already overwhelmed by physical casualties. Warriors displaying severe symptoms were sedated when possible, restrained when sedation unavailable, isolated when neither option was practical. Some recovered. Many didn't. Sleep deprivation affected everyone. Warriors trained to function on minimal sleep, but 3 months, with essentially 0 safe rest periods, degraded cognitive function below operational standards. Hallucinations became common. Warriors seeing things that weren't present, hearing voices from dead brothers, experiencing false memories of events that hadn't occurred. Some lost time, discovering hours had passed with no memory of intervening period. Combat effectiveness plummeted as exhaustion accumulated beyond capacity for Astartes' physiology to compensate through sheer determination. Hope died incrementally. First week they believed rescue would come. Emperor would send reinforcements. This was test or mistake or nightmare from which awakening was possible. Second week doubt crept in. Maybe rescue wouldn't come immediately, but eventually situation would resolve. Third week acceptance arrived. Nobody was coming. They'd been abandoned to die. Fourth week onward became exercise in choosing how to die rather than finding way to survive. Every dawn brought surprise that they'd survived another night. Every engagement they entered expecting death rather than victory. Tarvitz wrote in personal log that morale became greatest enemy after enemy fire. Warriors lost will to fight not from cowardice, but from sheer exhaustion combined with certainty that fighting only delayed inevitable death. Maintaining combat effectiveness required convincing warriors that dying well mattered more than dying. That killing traitors before being killed yourself represented victory of sorts. That making traitors pay price for their treachery justified continuing struggle when survival was impossible. The arguments worked. Mostly, but recorded desertions increased steadily as individuals concluded dying without witness on scorched dead world served no purpose. Some walked away from defensive positions, disappeared into ruins, presumably died alone rather than in battle they no longer considered meaningful. Others surrendered to traitors accepting corruption and probable death over certainty of death as loyalist. Exact numbers unknown, but estimates suggested 5 to 8% of survivors abandoned resistance in final month. Nobody condemned deserters. Understanding was absolute. They'd fought beyond any reasonable expectation. 3 months continuous combat under impossible conditions was more than anyone should have endured. If individuals concluded further resistance was meaningless, who could judge that conclusion invalid? Even Loken, who fought to literal last moments before final bombardment, admitted in later testimony that deserters might have been wiser. That dying for principle when principle changes nothing is beautiful but possibly foolish. That maybe survival through any means was valid choice. That admission matters more than heroic narratives acknowledge. Even strongest loyalist questioned whether resistance served purpose beyond making death take slightly longer to achieve. Even most dedicated warrior experienced moments wondering if collaboration might be preferable to extinction. They chose resistance anyway. But choice was difficult rather than obvious, painful rather than simple. Acknowledging that difficulty makes their choice more meaningful, not less.